Welcome back to Greek. This week, we are going to be looking at second declension neuter nouns, the neuter definite article, and some first and second declension adjectives. And at the end, we'll have our sixth vocab set, and at the very end, a teaser for next week's lesson, which today will be a sentence with a masculine first declension noun. And I personally love those, so next week's lesson will be very entertaining to me. And I hope it'll be entertaining to you too. So first we're going to start with the second declension neuter endings. So your nominative is omicron nu, on, genitive u, omicron upsilon, dative o, omega with an iota subscript. That should be no surprise to you at this point, given masculine and feminine both having that. And then accusative is on again. Now this makes sense because just like in Latin, where we have that ending, the nominative and accusative forms look exactly the same. The same is true in the plural, where we have a, alpha, on, omega nu, it's like an upsilon, omega nu. Dative is omicron iota sigma, and accusative, just like I said, same as nominative, so we get a. Let's go through and say these endings one more time, and then we'll move on. On, u, o, on. A, on, ois, a. And at the very end, let's do our vocatives. These are really easy for neuter, just the same as the nominative for both singular and plural. So we have on in the singular and a in the plural. That's it for neuter nouns. Now, the neuter definite article, which is the equivalent of ha for masculine and he for feminine. The neuter definite article begins with ta, tau omicron, and this is a case just like what we've seen with tain and ton and tus and tas in the masculine and feminine definite articles, where we have an acute, but there's always a word following it. So this acute actually flips to be a grav. So I just like to write the grav, and I'll continue to do this with all the accents that you see as gravs in my endings throughout this lesson. They are technically acutes until there's a word following them, but like I said, there's always a word following them, so I just write them as a grav in the table to help me remember. Genitive is tu, tau omicron upsilon with a circumflex over that upsilon, then to, tau omega, iota subscript and circumflex on the omega. And now accusative, same applies as with neuter nouns and adjectives. The nominative and accusative are going to be exactly the same. So your accusative definite article is also ta. In the plural, we have ta, which is tau alpha, with an acute that flips to become a grav. Genitive is tone, tau omega nu, with a circumflex. Dative is tois, tau omicron iota sigma, with a circumflex. And accusative is ta again. And as with the other definite articles, there is no vocative, so we don't even have to worry about that. All we need to know is nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative. So first, some nice little quick review. Let's write out all of our definite articles we've learned, see where they're similar, different, etc. So for masculine, the nominative singular is ha, feminine, he, and neuter, we just learned, is ta. In the genitive, tu, tes, and tu. In the dative, to, with an iota subscript, te, with an iota subscript, and to again. And then the accusative, ton, tain. Ooh, wow. I don't even know how I managed that. Tain and ta. So we see that in reality, the masculine and neuter definite articles are really similar. The only differences we see are in the nominatives, where the neuter has the tau before, and in the accusative, where that masculine has the ton, but we already knew that the neuter couldn't have that new ending because the accusative has to match the nominative. Otherwise, their genitive and dative are the same, and you'll see the same is true in the plural. So now let's look at the plural. In the masculine, we have hoi for neuter plural, or nominative plural, sorry. Feminine, hai, and neuter, ta. Genitive, tone, with a circumflex over that omega. Feminine, also tone, and neuter, also tone. So the genitive is really easy because they all look the same. In dative, tois, tais, only difference is that alpha instead of an omicron, and neuter, tois again. And in the accusative, tus, tas, and ta. So really, there are a lot of similarities here. And what I like about that is that if you know the masculine definite article really well, but you're blanking on one ending in the neuter, chances are you can kind of figure it out because it's likely either going to be the same or really similar. So I think that reviewing like this, seeing all three together, finding similarities and differences is probably the best way to solidify your knowledge. And make sure that if you're ever confused, you come back to this lesson video, because now you know there's a chart here of all the definite article endings. All the definite articles, not just the endings. Okay, let's look at first and second declension adjectives. We'll start with masculine because it could not be simpler for you. Nominative is os, genitive u, dative o, and accusative on. In the plural, oi, genitive on, dative ois, and accusative us. What are you probably thinking right now? This seems a lot like the endings we learned a couple lessons ago. Yes, back when we learned masculine noun endings, we learned all of these endings. They are exactly the same for masculine adjectives, which makes your life super easy because then you know that your endings are going to match when you have a masculine adjective that declines, or a masculine noun that declines like a masculine second declension noun. There are a couple masculine or feminine ones that decline like the opposite, but we won't worry about that right now. For the most part, your endings, once you know one, you know the other. And the same applies for vocative, where we have in the singular, just like we did with masculine nouns, and oi, the nominative, in the plural. If any of this is confusing to you, maybe go back a lesson or two and review. Review when we went over masculine noun endings for the first time, and really try to make sure that you understand those, and then you can add adjectives. Now let's take a look at feminine, which is a little bit more complicated, but that's all part of the fun. So the first thing you're going to ask yourself is, does your stem end in epsilon, iota, or rho? If you answer that question with yes, then you're going to decline using the alpha endings. If you answer the question with no, you are going to use the eta endings. Just to be clear, I'm going to write a little yes, no. So, when you see an adjective, to find your stem, take off the ending And this question addresses that very last letter in your adjective ending. This will make more sense once we do practice. So, back to our question. If your stem ends in epsilon, iota, or rho, you're going to use alpha endings, and if the stem ends in anything else, you're using eta endings. So what does that mean? Well, in the nominative singular, you'll either have a, alpha, or a, eta. Genitive, as or ace. Dative, a or a. And accusative, on or ain. Life gets super easy in the plural, where just like with our noun endings, all of your plural feminine endings are the same, regardless of the singular ending. So back when we were first learning first declension, long alpha stem, short alpha stem, eta stem, or mixed alpha eta stem, no matter what, they all had the same plural endings, right? So the same is true for our feminine adjectives. So in the nominative plural, I, genitive plural, own, dative plural, ice, and accusative plural, as. All of these endings in this chart you've already learned because of nouns. So it's just a matter of, with adjectives, knowing which stem you're going to be looking at, what endings you're going to be looking at based on your stem in the singular. Other than that, with feminine adjectives, you are smooth sailing because your vocative is exactly the same too, where you just take the nominative in both the singular and plural. So a or a, depending on your stem again, and then I in the plural. And that's it for feminine. Neuter is even simpler than feminine, sort of like masculine all over again, where we have on, oo, o, on, and in plural, a, own, ois, a. So these are exactly the same as our neuter noun endings that we just learned. Really the simplest it could be. And in the vocative, we have on and a. So really the biggest thing you're going to have to think about with adjectives is this next part, adjective positioning. Now, when you first hear adjective positioning, you're probably like, what in the world? I have never even heard or thought about the way that you position adjectives. I was thinking the same thing too. But in Greek, there are two positions. So your adjective can either be in attributive position or predicate position. Attributive means that your adjective follows your definite article directly. So the adjective is right after your definite article. This can come in a couple forms. So with our first example, we see ha agathos bios, where the agathos is following the ha immediately. But in the second example, we see that just because the adjective has a definite article right before it doesn't mean the noun can't too. This is still attributive position. All that matters is that the definite article is followed directly by an adjective. An attributive is translated really simply, where you just say the adjective noun. So here, agathos means good and bios means life. So this is the good life. And this is the good life. Now, the same is true if we were to move this bios over here. So if I were to do this, move this out of the way, move this over, and put our bios over here. Well, we're still in a attributive position, right? Because that agathos is right after your ha, your definite article. So it doesn't really matter what's happening with the noun, as long as it's associated with this adjective and the adjective immediately follows your definite article, you're in attributive position, and it's really easy to translate. Predicate position is a little bit trickier. So this is when you have, not trickier in terms of like the way that it looks in Greek, but a little bit trickier to translate. So with this, I just realized for some reason I wrote a couple of these endings as neuter. Don't really know why. Let me just fix that real quick. There we go. So, predicate means that your adjective does not directly follow your definite article. Pretty self-explanatory, right? If attributive was that it does directly follow, predicate has to be that it does not directly follow. So here we have ha, bios, agathos. The only difference between this and the first one being that your agathos is following your definite article with something in between. So we can't translate this anymore as the good life. Instead, we translate as the life is good. Or more generally, the noun is adjective. And you might be thinking, where is the verb here? I don't understand why we're adding an is. There's no sort of verb that we've learned yet that can be translated as is or be or whatever. But it's sort of like how we have predicate nominatives in Latin, where we would have like puella bona est, the girl is good. There you're having the is, but you do have a verb. Here, it's called predicate because the same thing is happening, you just don't have a verb. It's just an understood meaning that when you have an adjective that does not directly follow your definite article, you translate it as the noun is adjective. Same is true as with the attributive, where this can look a little bit different depending on the specific situation we're looking at. So we have ha, bios, agathos in the first one, and then we have agathos, ha, bios. Same thing, both are predicate, and both have the adjective separated somehow from that definite article. You might be thinking here, well, technically, the adjective is right next to the definite article, right? Like, there's nothing between them. But it must be that the adjective is directly following the definite article. So that agathos would have to be right here for this to be attributive. The way I remember predicate versus attributive, as in their meanings and the way that you translate them, is the example I was just using for Latin, where a predicate nominative in Latin is that adjective that is used to describe a noun when there's an est form, some sort of sum form in the sentence. That's when you see a predicate nominative. So I remember that, we're translating predicate noun-adjective phrases in Greek like we would use a predicate nominative in Latin, and it's called a predicate nominative. So that's how I remember predicate is what it is, how it's translated, and attributive I just know is the other one, to be honest. So whatever helps you remember it. If you know anything, again, leave a comment, reach out to me, whatever, so that we can help each other here. That's it for adjective positioning. Not super scary, just something you probably haven't seen before. Now, we're going to do a couple practice, and then there will be more practice in the worksheet as usual. So here we have ta kalon futon. Kalon is our adjective. It means beautiful or handsome or good or noble. It can mean a lot of things. And futon is not a couch, unfortunately. It is a plant. So this is the beautiful plant. Okay, so let's look at our nominative singular. So for nominative singular, we just have the phrase we just looked at. Ta, colon, futon. And like I've said now a couple times, we are not worrying about adjective and noun accents anymore. All you really need to worry about for this course is the definite article accents and verb accents, and other like little things, conjunctions, prepositions, whatever it may be. If those have accents, you should learn those too, but don't worry about nouns and adjectives. Then genitive, tu, kalu, futu. Dative, to, kalo, futo. Accusative, ta, colon, futon. I know it can be pretty tempting to add that new right there. I've definitely made that mistake before. You just have to make sure you catch yourself. Remind yourself that with neuter nouns, that nominative, with neuter anythings, the nominative, it has to match the accusative. So if that helps you remember that for accusative, you can't put a new on the end of that definite article, even though you're putting it on the end of your adjective and noun forms. Hopefully that helps. Whatever helps you, just try not to get tripped up by that. In the plural, ta, kala, futa, tone, colon, futon, tois, kalois, futois. And then in the accusative, ta, kala, futa. Not too bad, right? We just learned these endings, but once you get the hang of them, we see that they're no harder than the masculine or feminine endings we've already learned. And in the vocative, we know that the definite article doesn't have a form, so we can use this O, don't have to though, and we are going to use our nominative forms all over again because neuter is nice and simple like that. So we get colon, futon in the singular, and kala, futa in the plural. All right, let's take a look at one more example. This one I actually think is a little bit harder than the neuter one we just did, even though we just learned those neuter endings. Just because with this one, we have to keep track of a couple different things as we go along. The first thing you want to ask yourself is, what gender is this? We can determine that whenever we're unsure by that definite article. So we get he, which is the feminine definite article. Axia is an adjective, means worthy. And adelphe, we actually learned last week, and it means sister. Axia ends with what? Or the stem of axia, I should say, ends with what? So remember, to find the stem, we take off that ending, which here we know the nominative singular feminine adjective ending is alpha. So we take off the alpha, and we're left with the stem. We ask ourselves, what does the stem end in? We see the stem ends in an iota. And now we can ask our feminine adjective question. And remember, our question is, does the stem end in epsilon, iota, or rho? Well, we just said that the stem ends in iota, right? So the answer to this question is yes. And we'll remember when we said, if you answer that question with yes, you're going to use the alpha-based endings. So axia is an adjective where you would use the alpha-based endings in the feminine. Okay, so let's just get right into it. The nominative singular is he, axia, adelphe, genitive, tes, Axios. Adelphas. Dative. Te. Oxia. Adelphae. An accusative. Tain. Oxion. Adelphane. So yes, this can be a little bit tricky because you're keeping track of, well, what are my definite article endings, what are my alpha endings, what are my eta endings. But really, once you get it in your head that you just need to keep track of each word as its own thing, then you should be smooth sailing. But I really, really, really recommend that you go through this as a group, right? So you're declining as a group rather than declining as, I think I've mentioned this before, but rather than declining first your entire definite article, then your entire adjective, and then your entire noun. It's a lot more productive for you as a learner to be declining the whole phrase together, because that really solidifies your ending knowledge, your understanding of the words and how they interact. And so I really, really, really recommend, and I know it's hard, that you decline this as a whole thing rather than hey first, then oxia, then adelphae. Do hey, oxia, adelphae. If that doesn't make sense, reach out to me. Okay, in the plural, we have high, oxii, adelphi. Then tone, oxion, adelphone. Dative, tis, oxiis, adelphis. And in the accusative, tos, oxios, adelphos. Plural, significantly easier because your endings match a lot more. But I think the singular is a fun challenge. Good way to test how much you actually remember. And in the vocative, we get rid of that definite article because the form doesn't exist, and we get oxia, adelphae, adelphae in the singular, and oxii, adelphi in the plural. Matches our nominatives exactly. Not too bad. And now we're on to vocab. That's all the heavy lifting we're doing today. So vocab, we only have one verb and just some nouns and a couple adjectives. Nothing too crazy. So for verbs, we have lepo and the future of lepso. That means to leave behind or abandon. Just like linquo in Latin. That's the sense of leave, not like leave physically, leave something behind. Okay. Nouns, we have bios, ha, which means life, we used that earlier. Doron, ta, which means gift. Ergon, ta, which means work, task, or deed. Thesauros, which means treasure or treasury, place for keeping money essentially. And yes, thesaurus does come from that. Shocking, I know. And then we have teknon, ta, which means child or offspring, and futon, ta, which means plant or tree. So mostly neuter nouns and then a couple masculine ones in there. And now for our adjectives. We've just got 3 to start with this week. Agathos, on, so these are the feminine and neuter endings, rather than having the genitive, singular, and definite article. For adjectives, we write them as masculine, feminine ending, neuter ending, just like in Latin. So agathos means good or brave. Axios, axion, means worthy, takes the genitive, so this means you would have a form of axios, so say axios, and then some genitive form. So you could be worthy of a plant, since I just really like that word, so you would have axios tu futu, so worthy of the plant. Then we have kalos, kalon, means beautiful, handsome, good, or noble. We also saw this earlier. And of these adjectives, just to do a quick little test, which one of them would use the alpha stem when in the feminine? It's pretty obvious because your nominatives tell you already. It's axios, which we already knew because we did a practice with it, but it's always good to test yourself because here with agathos, we take off that os ending, the masculine ending, and we get that our stem, agath, ends with a theta, which is not epsilon, iota, or rho, so we know to use the eta endings when feminine. Axios, we take off that os again. Look at our stem, oxy, which ends in an iota, and so an iota is an epsilon, iota, or rho, so we use the alpha endings in the feminine. And kalos, we take off the os. We get kal as our stem, which ends in a lambda. I was going to say leopard, I do not know why, which ends in a lambda. Lambda is not epsilon, iota, or rho, so we use our eta endings. And that's it for vocab. Now we'll do a really quick teaser and we'll be done for the day. I know today was a really big, lots of new stuff lesson, but I think it's a really fun one and pretty self-explanatory if you practice. Okay. For our teaser, we've got this lovely sentence, so let's say it first. Ha neonias agathos lepeto ta doron. So, let's start by identifying our verb. Well, which of these endings could be a verb ending? Just that eto ending, right? So lepeto has an eto, just like I said, and that we know is our third person singular, present, active, imperative, right? So it's a third person imperative. Pretty interesting. So we know to translate this as let. If you don't remember doing this, go back a couple lessons and make sure that you review it because it is pretty important to understand in the context of sentences. So we're going to do let as our translation. And then let's look for our subject. Well, we have two things that could be subject, right? Because this looks nominative to me and this looks nominative to me. Well, now we need to ask ourselves, can either of those forms be something else? Well, we look at ha neonias agathos, and we think, well, there's that ha, that's masculine. And we know that that os ending doesn't exist anywhere else. It's just that masculine nominative singular. So we know that ha neonias agathos is going to be our subject because it has to be nominative. Now ta doron, that ta tells us our gender, right? So the ta is neuter, the neuter definite article. And we know about neuters that when we have a neuter noun, adjective, definite article, whatever, the nominative and accusatives are going to look the same. So ta do ron is going to be our direct object. Now let's go through and translate. Lepo, we just learned, means to leave behind. So let, third person singular, let's look for our subject. Let the. Now, what have we learned about any of these words in this phrase here? Ha, we know. That is our masculine definite article. So we know that one. What in the world is neonios? We don't know that, do we? Well, we will next week, because this is an example of a masculine first declension noun. So we see that os ending, and you're probably like, oh yeah, feminine, it's all fine. Nope, it's masculine, and they declined really interestingly. Love them. And neonios, all you gotta know for now is that this is the nominative form, and that it is, in fact, masculine. Next week, we'll be learning how to decline nouns like neonios. Agathos, we just learned, is an adjective. Well, now that we know we've got an adjective in this phrase, we have to ask ourselves, is this adjective an attributive or predicate position? So, what did we learn to ask? Does the adjective immediately follow a definite article? Well, no, right? Because neonios is right after the definite article. Agathos has no definite article peeping in here to make it attributed position. So we know that here agathos is in predicate position, and we learn to translate predicate position as the noun is adjective. So here, neonios means youth. So the youth, or boy, is agathos, we just learned means good. So the boy is good, the boy who is good. Lepeto ta doron. So let the boy who is good leave behind ta doron. Doron, we just learned, means gift. And so we already know that this is neuter, so it can be our accusative direct object. So the gift. Let's put it all together one more time, and then we'll be done for today. Let the youth who is good leave behind the gift. Let the youth who is good leave behind the gift. I know that was a really tricky sentence, probably the most complicated one we've done yet, but a really good way to test what you know and what you maybe need to review a little bit. For extra practice on everything we talked about today, check out this week's lesson worksheet linked down below. There's also the syllabus down there, my contact information, and everything else you might need. So check that out. If you have any questions, write down in the description. And let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I will see you next week for some masculine first declension nouns.